Hello everyone, Berserkhead here, and welcome to Should You Buy It, my series in which I take a look at the most recent piece of DLC for the games of the Total War franchise and tell you whether if you should buy it or not. In this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at the Empire's Ascent Culture Pack, which is the newest piece of DLC for Total War Attila at the time of making this video. So let us begin. The Empire's Ascent is your standard culture pack in the sense that it adds 3 new playable factions to the game. There is also a 4th one that was added as a VLC, which is the Lakmids, but I'm not going to be talking about those since they're not a part of the culture pack and they're not added by it, but once again they're a VLC faction. The factions that are added by the culture pack are Himyar, Axum, and the 2 new kids, and I'm going to be talking about them individually in a little bit. But before that, let's go through what the DLC adds in general in terms of campaign mechanics and stuff like that. And why not start with the cultural traits for the Desert Kingdom? So all those 3 factions plus the Lakmids, the VLC faction, are going to belong in a new category, which is the Desert Kingdoms. And all those factions have the same cultural traits. So let's take a look at them. First of all, they have Sunscorch, which gives them +2 sanitation in all regions, which is a very nice boost to sanitation. Sanitation is sort of an important thing and a thing that you gotta pay attention to in the Attila campaign. So that's a nice little boost given to them as a cultural trait. And also, if you ask me, it makes sense from a historical standpoint as well. They're also immune to desert attrition, and they have the Scourge of the Desert, which gives them plus melee attack during desert battles. So these 2 traits give them a very nice edge when it comes to fighting in the desert and just inhabiting a desert environment, which makes sense since they're the Desert Kingdom, so they sort of live up to their name. It's just sort of similar to the way the Geats have immunity to snow attrition. It just makes sense from a campaign standpoint because they inhabit a region where they're going to meet a lot of desert attrition, so it just gives them a nice little edge when it comes to fighting the other factions. They also have a negative culture trait, which is Fractured Fates, which gives them increased public order penalty for religious differences between new religions. And speaking of religion, let's say what the DLC adds in terms of religion. It adds 3 new religions, which are Eastern Christianity, Judaism, and Semitic paganism. 2 of those factions have 2 religions as their main, which means that they can choose between 2 religions and they can sort of switch between them whenever they wish, and it's going to have a different impact on their campaign. So first of all, religion is really important for those 3 factions because it influences them in a more major way compared to the other factions. First of all, you have more diplomatic penalties slash bonuses when it comes to, you know, factions of different or similar religions, and then you also have different unit rosters for 2 of those factions. Again, the Himyar and the Axum, based on the religion you choose. You have different barracks, for example, which once again give you access to some of those units that you wouldn't otherwise have if you chose the other religion. They also have split victory conditions, and they have different technologies, different building chains. So religion just influences those factions in a much more major way, as I mentioned. So it just adds a very good element of replayability, which I really like. So the way you switch between religions is you basically can build buildings, so you have access at any time to building chains that can increase the religious influence of 2 religions. So in the case of Axum, you can build buildings that increase the influence of Eastern Christianity, but at the same time you can build buildings that increase the religious influence of Judaism. So you can switch between those 2 factions. Now it's going to be difficult because again you have an increased public order penalty, but you can do it. And if you do it and like switch between a different religion, you know, that's going to influence your campaign. So, you know, you can have 2 playthroughs, one where you play as one other religion and another one where you play as the other religion. If you have above 75% influence for the religion, you unlock those tier 5 barracks that I mentioned earlier that give you access to those units that are unique for the religion you chose. In the case of the Himyar, you can choose between Judaism or Semitic paganism. So those 2 are different to the religions that the Axum can choose between. So that's a really cool mechanic, and it really adds a lot of replayability. So choosing which religion you want to play, you're going to have different chain of events that are going to trigger, and it's just gonna dictate the pace of your campaign and just the direction your campaign is going. So that's a thing that's unique for the Axum and the Himyar as factions. But let's talk about the factions individually and just take a closer look at them. So first of all, the Tanukits, which are hands down my favorite faction from this DLC, and let me tell you why. Now, first of all, let's take a look at their faction traits. The first faction trait that they have is a very unique campaign mechanic. They only obtain food through settlement battles when they're a horde faction. So when they're a horde faction, which is the way you start as a horde faction, sort of a Roman, like East Roman rebellion. You start as a horde faction in the between the Sassanid Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, and you start a war directly with the Eastern Roman Empire. And the way you obtain food, you don't have any buildings that actually provide you with food, and the only way you can obtain food is through battles, basically. Battles for settlements. Like every time you win a settlement battle, you gain 60 food. That's only a thing when you're a horde, though. Once you settle down, you have your farm buildings and stuff like that. But I know this may seem sort of confusing, first of all, but it's actually very simple. Each time you fight a settlement battle and you win it, you gain 60 food. That's really how it works. Then they have additional horde growth gained through successful battles. So those guys are really into fighting, as you can probably tell by their faction traits. And they also have they gain a rebellion militia unit for each turn that they're raiding. So you might be excited about this and be like, yeah, I'm just gonna stay in raiding stance and I'm just gonna recruit units. No, don't get excited about it. It's a really shitty unit, but I guess if you want to just unit spam and get a really numerous army, that's the way to do it. But yeah, the militia unit is not really that great. As a mechanic, sure, it's interesting, but it's not really, the unit that you get is not really that great. Now, when it comes to their unique features, they have 34 new buildings. All of their buildings, when they're a horde, are unique. So that's 34 new buildings that no other factions have. So that's a very interesting thing. They also have a unique chain of events similar to the other two factions, and their chain of events is basically you are a rebellion of the Eastern Roman Empire, and you gotta do nasty things to them. And you're gonna have those missions where you just gotta do certain things. You gotta complete certain objectives. For example, the first one is raise 5 East Roman settlements, and you're gonna get rewarded for it. So for example, you don't research your barrack buildings, but you unlock them dynamically through completing those objectives. So that's very cool. They're a very cool faction. If we take a look at their unit roster, they have 17 unique units, which is a lot. And they basically excel at shock cavalry. They have a pretty good variety in this department. They also have some pretty cool ambush infantry, and I also heard that those spikes that they have are very good, and they might potentially be used in competitive play as well. In the campaign, what I've seen from them, those spikes are very good, and the cavalry that they have in the early campaign is very good too. So a very interesting faction. It might be sort of difficult. The first time I tried to play, I failed, and the Eastern Roman Empire actually defeated me. But the second time I tried, I really enjoyed my campaign, and that's the faction that I played the most of, simply because I really like the way they work. And again, they have this element of replayability as well, because the first time you might just want to play as a horde, and then eventually you might want to settle down. So once again, they're not, even though they cannot choose between two different religions, they have their own element of replayability. And again, you might want to start 2 different playthroughs as this faction. Alright, let's move on to the Axum. So their first faction trait that they have supply network, which gives them plus 30 food for each active trade route. It's maxed out at 150, so you cannot really abuse it. However, it's really a nice thing to have in the late game, I guess, because this is something that's not really dependent on fertility. You're still gonna have buildings that are gonna provide you with food no matter what the fertility is. So I don't think you're gonna be worrying about food in the late game either way. But it's just a very nice boost just to make sure that you have some food for free. And those guys are really big into trading, so it makes sense that they have a faction trade like that. Then their second faction trait is Merchant Guards, which gives them 100% to mercenary pool replenishment. And this one is sort of useless if you ask me. I don't know. I've never been a huge fan of mercenaries, but I guess it's a cool thing to have if you like using them. And then their third faction trait is commercial mastery, which gives them plus 10% from trade income. Once again, those guys are really big into trading. So that's also what their unique chain of events is tied to. So basically, you're going to have, again, missions similar to what I explained for the Tanukits. You're going to have certain objectives that you're going to have to complete. In their case, though, you're going to have to secure certain, like, trade resources. And once you secure them, you're going to unlock new spice buildings. And you're also going to have access to some Indian influenced units. So once again, it just works the same way. You just unlock a few buildings and a few units dynamically. So yeah. If we take a look at their unit roster, they have 15 new units, and what they have, what's sort of unique to them is they have a lot of axe-wielding units. They have, for example, the Spice Guard, which is a two-handed axe-wielding unit, so this one could be potentially used in competitive play. They also have some sort of fragile units, but they have very high attack, so if you outflank your opponent with them, they might be very useful. And an interesting thing that I personally like about their faction and the units that they have is that they have Warhound archers. So they have Warhound units, but they also have archers in them. So that's a unique thing that they have. And once again, they're going to have different unit rosters in the campaign based on their main religion. The only complaint that I have about Axum is that their campaign is sort of easy because they start at the very corner of the map. They're really, they're not really close to the big empires such as the Eastern Roman Empire or the Sassanid Empire. So they're in a really safe spot, so you can really do whatever you want with them. It's just the campaign is a little bit too easy in my opinion. So I guess they're sort of a beginner faction. Their campaign is just not as challenging as the Tanukid campaign, but still they're a very nice faction, and the units that they have and all the unique traits that they have sort of makes up for the easy campaign. So yeah, let's move on to the Himyar. If we take a look at their faction traits, first of all, they have fatigue rate minus 15% for all units. Once again, a desert faction that's going to give them, a very nice edge over the other factions because you're going to fight a lot of desert battles and your units get exhausted very easily in the desert. So minus 15% is not a lot, but still, it's a nice sort of little edge that they have. Their second faction trait that they have is Marab Dam, which is a unique fertility boosting building that they can build in the capital. So that's another very unique thing that they have. It's not that big of a deal, but it's just an interesting mechanic from a campaign standpoint. And they have Desert Saboteurs, which stops foreign replenishment in regions where armies are present. So this one is very interesting. I really like this one, and especially when I played as the Axum and I played against the Himyar, that's something that really annoyed me. But it didn't annoy me in a bad way. It was sort of a thing that you just gotta have in mind playing as this faction or against this faction. It's just a very nice thing that they have. I just really like it as a campaign mechanic. It's just a very unique thing that they have. So let's take a look at the other things that they have. First of all, they're a unique chain of events. The Marab Dam, which is this building that I mentioned that they can build in their capital. So basically their chain of events is gonna be they have this dam that they gotta repair every now and then, so you choose whether or not you're gonna spend money on repairs. And if you spend money on repairs, you're gonna have likely a positive outcome. If you don't, however, you might get screwed over by some pretty negative traits. So that's their unique chain of events. It's not as interesting as the other two, to be honest. But still, it's a very unique thing that their campaign is so reliant on a building that they have in their capital. So that's cool. And when it comes to their unit roster, they have a lot of variety when it comes to camel units, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I guess they might be useful. They have some interesting, very armored skirmisher units as well. And that's about it. I mean, their unit roster is really not that impressive, but I mean, still they have a lot of unique units, so they're, still a very fleshed out and very solid faction. Maybe my least favorite out of the three, but they're definitely worth a try still in the campaign. They're still very much worth it. So let's get to the real question. Should you buy this DLC? I mean, you've probably figured it out by all the positive things that I said about it, but yes, this culture pack is totally worth it. I really enjoyed my time with it, especially with the Tanukas. They're such a good faction. But anyways, Let's talk about it in general, and let's compare it to the previous pieces of DLC for Total War Attila. So first of all, you had the Viking Forefathers Culture Pack, which was a pre-order DLC, so the factions were cool. You know, they had a cool theme, you know, the Viking Forefathers, but they were pretty vanilla in terms of uniqueness, I guess. Then you had the Celtic Culture Pack, which was great. I got really pleasantly surprised by it, and I still think that it's a very good culture pack. Then you had the Last Roman, which was a disgrace. Some people liked it. I personally hated it. But now we have this one, and this is totally the best piece of DLC for Total War Attila so far. I mean, this time CA absolutely nailed it, because they stopped releasing a piece of DLC every month, and instead they just started working on their pieces of DLC more, and they try to make those factions unique. Because in Rome 2 you had a lot of pieces of DLC where they're basically faction unlocks, and they basically added a few faction traits to those factions that they unlocked, and also like 2 or 3 unique units. This is not the case with Attila, and it's really sad that not many people play Attila, and that Rome 2 still has a bigger player base than Attila. But the DLC is great. It's all those factions are very unique, very different from each other. They have very distinct unit rosters, and they have just a very nice atmosphere when it comes to playing the campaign. As for the multiplayer, I don't know. The previous culture packs, I don't know if the factions are really useful for multiplayer. Like, I think the Jutes were pretty good in multiplayer from the Norseman factions. Then the Celtic factions, I don't know. I'm not an expert in multiplayer. I don't play the Attila multiplayer, but that's what I've heard from other people who do. But the Celtic factions, I think you're very limited in what you can do in multiplayer. They're not really very competitive factions. But so far, what I've heard from people about those 3 new factions in this culture pack is that they're actually gonna be viable in multiplayer. So this might be the first DLC that's actually worth it, just for the multiplayer. So this is how I think about it. This DLC costs €7.50, or your original equivalent. So just think about it this way: you have 3 factions, you have €7.50, which makes €2.50 per each faction. Would I pay €2.50 for each of those factions? Yes, I totally would. And are they all worth it? Would I play as all of them in the campaign? Yes, I totally would. So why not buy this DLC? I might just seem way too positive about it, but I just really like it. The factions are more fleshed out than any other DLC factions for Attila or Rome 2. So I think that if CA keep releasing DLC like that, I mean, they just absolutely nailed it this time. The factions are very fleshed out, very polished, very unique, and they're definitely all worth it. So that's all I'm gonna say about this DLC. I really liked it. It really made me play Attila, because especially when I played the first faction that I tried out were the Tanukids. So when I started playing as the Tanukids, I just started playing, and I played for like 5 hours non-stop, because I just enjoyed it so much, and it just made me play Attila more. And that's a good thing when a DLC does that, and when you're like, hey, I don't want to play this game, but then this DLC comes out and you're like, hey, I want to play this game for 5 hours straight, then you know the DLC is good. So yeah, once again, I'm sorry if you didn't expect me to be so positive about it, but I just can't say anything bad about it. It's a great piece of DLC, and I hope that CA are gonna continue releasing DLC in the same manner. Not very often, and very polished and fleshed out as this one. So yeah, that's gonna be it for me for this video. So yeah, see you next time. Goodbye.